panel of experts who can shed light on Venezuela's past, present, and how Maria and the people of Venezuela are really continuing to drive change. We have a great moderator. He's a CNN national correspondent, Rafael Romo. He's a native of Mexico. Rafael is an Emmy award-winning journalist with more than 3 decades of experience as an anchor, correspondent, and professor. Rafael, please join me. He's based here in Atlanta, hometown of CNN, by the way, don't forget. Before this role, he served as both anchor and correspondent for CNN in Español, CNN in Spanish, where he covered top stories across Latin America and the world. He also writes articles on Latin American issues for CNN Digital. And in 2019, he covered the deadly clashes between government forces and protesters in Venezuela. Rafael, thank you for being here. Muchas gracias. And tú nos introduces el resto del panel. Gracias.
President Cabrera, first of all, allow me to say thank you for this invitation. Venezuela is a country that means a lot to me personally, even though I'm not from Venezuela. And I'm sure, please proceed. I will introduce our guests one by one. And it means a lot to our guests today. Before I begin, I wanted to say, Ana Corina, Ricardo, we're honored by your presence. I know what your family has been through. I have had the privilege of meeting your mother in person. I know what it's like to be a Machado. We were going to interview your mother in Caracas once, and just to give the rest of the room an idea of what this family has to go through, it's like a law enforcement operation. My contact had to call her contact, and on our way to the interview, that's when we would learn where the interview would happen. I'm not going to bother you with more details, but I just wanted to offer that to give you an idea, a glimpse of what this family and the opposition in Venezuela as a whole have to go through. So thank you for being here. Congratulations on the award, and I'm honored that you are here, and we wish that your mother could be here, right? So thank you for being here. And if I may ask another round of applause, not only for them, but for the entire family. The people on my left really need no introduction. These are people that I have a lot of respect for, that are very admired by people in the field and elsewhere. We have, I don't even want to say, but I don't know how many years of experience we have here. And it's just people who also care very deeply about Venezuela. So I wanted to thank them all for being here. First of all, I would like to introduce to you Charles Shapiro. He is a former U.S. ambassador to Venezuela and former director of the World Affairs Council. Welcome, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you very much for being here. Jennie Lincoln is the senior advisor for Latin America and the Caribbean at the Carter Center. Jennie, thank you very much for being here. Eric Farnsworth is vice president of the American Society and Council of the Americas, and he just flew in from Washington this morning. Welcome to Atlanta.
Thank you.
Much nicer weather, isn't it?
It is. It's good to be back.
And so if being Mexican and all, I'm old-fashioned, so I'm going to start with the lady. And we were talking previously with Jennie, and you were sharing that you were actually in Venezuela for 6 weeks last July. I assume that a lot of people here follow news from Venezuela, but for those of you who don't, Venezuela held its last election. Should we call it election? I'll leave it up to you. Last July, and the opposition had a very good showing, but in the end, the result was the same. And so, Jennie, I just would like to ask you to begin with to tell us what it was like to be in Venezuela last July and what your team at the Carter Center had to go through, and how does that compare to the many other times that you've been to Venezuela?
Thank you, Rafael, and thank you, Ivan Allen Award Committee,
President Cabrera, for this opportunity to be here. I promised my other panelists that I will not take up the whole time, but I will tell you why I'm here. And that is to share with you briefly that the Carter Center had the only independent election observation group for the election July 28th in Venezuela. Fast forward, it wasn't supposed to be like that. The EU was supposed to send a mission, a large mission, and at the last minute, they were uninvited. It was very difficult for us to determine a path forward with a small delegation. I had a team of 17 people from 11 countries. The Carter Center is known for election observations, over 120 election observations in the course of the Carter Center, and with very strong principles to honor the international standards of electoral practices. To that end, we maintain independence and require a memorandum of understanding with a country, and that's why the invitation from Venezuela was rather strange, because we didn't expect it, and we didn't expect that they would actually agree to our rules of A, having total access to the electoral process, B, total freedom of mobility throughout the country, no restrictions, no guards, we had our own guards, and C, freedom to have access to the press, to make statements, to have no filters to what we said. Those were our rules of the game. They honored that. We went, they honored that, but this context, the electoral context, was an uphill battle for the opposition. The authoritarian government had control of all the rules of the game, and they undermined the opposition all along the way. And this is where María Corina Machado comes in, and a Joan of Arc for Venezuela, to lead a gaggle of opposition. The opposition was very fragmented, but to be able to gather the opposition so that at the end, July 28th, the opposition not only won almost 70% of the vote, they had the data to prove it. Now, I'm at Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech is data-driven. And what the opposition was able to do under the leadership of María Corina Machado and a number of technical people that were gathered to support this effort was to prove through no doubt that the electoral system that the Venezuelans were bragging about being so good was. And the proof in their system with 3 ways of knowing the results, I won't belabor it, but they had an electronic system and they had paper trails that proved who won. But here we are today celebrating her for her social courage, and she is in hiding in Venezuela. And the president of Venezuela today is not Edmundo Gonzalez, who won almost 70% of the vote, but Nicolás Maduro. And so here we are today in a context of an authoritarian government in Venezuela that basically stole the election and left an opposition that had rallied and had proven the support in the country. And now they are up against the authoritarian regime that exists today. I'll stop there and share the platform.
Jenny, if you allow me, I would like to give some background for people in the room who may not be familiar with the latest developments in Venezuela. In 2023, Venezuela had the closest thing to what we would call here a primary. María Corina Machado won 90% of the vote. So she would have been, if she had been allowed, the presidential candidate. She would have been able to run against the current president, Nicolás Maduro. But what happened? The electoral authority said, no, you are banned from running. A rule was made up that made her ineligible to run, and that's why the opposition got together and came out with González Urrutia, who was then the presidential candidate. So for those of you who are not familiar with the situation in Venezuela, I just wanted to give you that background. Jenny, if I may follow up, of all the possible reasons that the Venezuelan regime might have had, why do you think they wanted to have the Carter Center there for July 28th?
I'm convinced that they thought that we would certify their win. And we spoke earlier, I also believe that they were deluded into thinking that they were going to win. Their briefings to us emphasized that they were going to win by 4 to 5%, and their polling and this, that, and the other. So they thought we would be there to be able to say, yes, they did. And quite frankly, I will share with you, they were quite shocked that even though at midnight, after not announcing the votes all evening, the president of the Electoral Council went to the television and said, Nicolas Maduro has won by 51% of the vote. Punto final. No backup, no explanation of the votes, nothing. It's just, he won. Nothing to back it up. So that's when the Carter Center was able to make a statement. By the way, we did leave the country first. We were not expecting to leave quite so suddenly, but not only were we advised to be cautious, but it was advisable not to make our statement until we had cleared airspace, not just wheels up, but cleared airspace. So we made our statement that said, this election did not meet international standards, cannot be called democratic, and we called upon the government to produce the tally sheets, the data, to show how they were backing up their numbers. That was July 30th, 2 days after the election. To this day, they have not produced a single piece of information to prove the number that they claimed was their 51%.
And there was something, some of the room may know this, but there was something that the opposition did this time that was incredibly smart. They took digital images of the tally count. And they were able to produce that, and that was the only results that the world was able to see. And that's why organizations like the Carter Center had a better idea as to what had happened. Now, I wanted to go to Ambassador Shapiro. Mr. Ambassador, you know better than most in this room what has transpired in Venezuela in the last 20 years, because you were ambassador there during Chavez. Not a fun time to be in Venezuela, if I may say the least. But I wanted to ask you, in 2019, the United States and dozens of nations around the world recognized Juan Guaido, the then president of the National Assembly, as the legitimate president of Venezuela. And I wanted to ask you, what happened since then? Because only a couple of years later, that fizzled away.
Yeah.
And I don't want to put you on the spot, but why do you think that the United States and regional leaders could have done differently to help democracy in Venezuela? What were some of the mistakes that you were able to see based on your experience?
Well, thank you, Rafael, and loads of mistakes. And one of them, I mean, the lesson is, it is very hard for any country, including the United States, to mount international pressure on, whether it's Venezuela, Russia, you name it, to get them to change their course of action and to maintain that over time. Economic sanctions are, the administration put economic sanctions on Venezuela. The economy was collapsing, and that further accelerated that collapse, impoverished Venezuela further than it would have otherwise. But when you've got a corrupt group of people in power, and they continue to live well, even though their people are not, the population is not, and they know if they leave power, they're likely to go to jail. I mean, the incentives for them to stay in power are enormous. And the ability of the outside world to maintain pressure dissipates over time, because people want to trade. People want to buy and sell products. And that's exactly what happened with Guaido. So right now, as Jennie described, we've got a usurper sworn in, the way you had the pretender to the throne of Romania in the early 20th century. You've got the pretender to the president of Venezuela, named Nicolas Maduro, with a country of 30 million people, a significant country. I mean, there's a natural tendency to want to do business with Venezuela. And it requires U.S. leadership. The international community, the international democratic community is terrific, but it requires U.S. leadership for it to take action. And we're less than a month into the new administration here, and they haven't defined their policy yet towards Venezuela.
I also wanted to ask you what the danger is, because this is not a problem that exists in a vacuum. And I wanted to ask you what the danger is, not only to the United States, but as a region. I remember a number of years ago, we did an expose where we showed the world that the Venezuelan embassy in Baghdad, in Iraq, was selling legitimate Venezuelan passports
Yes.
to people in the Middle East, some of them very shady characters, making it appear like they were legitimate Venezuelan nationals. And a passport gives you a citizenship. And so that would give them the benefit of coming to this part of the world, travel directly to Venezuela, and be able to be here for whatever purpose. I wanted to ask you, what is the danger to the United States of a continued dictatorial regime in Venezuela? The United States and the region, what is the danger here?
Well, I mean, you just described part of it yourself. I mean, you can go to, anybody in the audience can go to Caracas and within 2 or 3 days get a legitimate Venezuelan passport with your photo in your name or in someone else's name if you want, right? Which then would allow you to travel around and do whatever you want with a legitimate passport. But I think it goes beyond that. There are, you tell me the number, you Venezuelans. How many Venezuelans have left the country?
8 million.
8 million.
A quarter of the population.
Imagine if a quarter of the population of the United States left. A quarter of the population has left. They're a huge burden on Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, Ecuador, Chile. I mean, so they're not on purpose, but having to provide education and health care for all these Venezuelans who no longer the degree you had, in Venezuela doesn't count in the other countries. I mean, it is a destabilizing factor on the countries where those 8 million Venezuelans have gone. In addition to which, you've got an alliance, an international alliance of the countries that hate the United States, right? And that in this hemisphere is Venezuela with Nicaragua and Cuba, and you've got, of course, Iran, Russia, and China. And they're all, to varying degrees, allied and helping one another, and that's not good for the United States.
Eric, I wanted to ask you the next question. I remember the last time I was in Venezuela was in 2019. There's a sewage canal running through Caracas. And one of the most enduring images that I ever saw.
That's a river, it's not a canal.
Well, thank you. Was seeing a group of 6, 7 men, grown men, diving in the sewage. And at first, at a distance, I didn't know what they were doing. And so I approached them, and when they came back to the edge, I asked them, "What are you doing?" And they said, "We're trying to find gold, silver, jewelry, anything we can find." And my question was, "But you can die." And they said, "If we don't do this, we will die anyway because we have nothing to eat." And so that's the reality. The reason why I wanted to share that story with the room, that's the reality, daily reality that many Venezuelans face. They have no other option but to leave their country to all those countries that you mentioned and the United States. CNN counted the number of Venezuelans who are currently benefiting under TPS, the temporary protection status, 300,000 who are currently in this country. If you add Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Cubans, the number goes up to 530,000. What can you tell us about the situation of these people when we just heard an announcement from the White House saying that TPS is going to be revoked for those hundreds of thousands of people? What is their outlook, or is there a hope for them at all?
Rafael, thanks for asking me the easy question on the panel. I really appreciate that. I flew all the way from Washington, and this is the treatment I get. No, I'm teasing. I've worked with Rafael many times on his programs, on others with his colleagues, and it's a great pleasure to be with you in person.
Thank you.
Here, I saw Angel leave, but actually, there he is. But I actually wanted to confirm the story that he told at the beginning. He called me up in D.C. about Maria Corina and started describing the award, and it was like an instantaneous mind meld. It's like Maria Corina Machado, she is made for this award. I can think of literally nobody better qualified for her than her for this outstanding recognition. So congratulations to the committee, to the university, but Angel, I have to say, we miss you in Northern Virginia. And Georgia Tech has gotten a real star, so good for you and good for them. I would also say, though, that my relationship with Georgia Tech actually goes back some way, all the way back to the 1980s, because my first internship, Rafael, I know this has nothing to do with your question, but I'll get to it in a second. My first experience in Washington, I was an intern for Senator Sam Nunn. In 1987 on the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, when he was just thinking about whether he should run for the presidency. And
you're dating yourself.
Well, exactly, I am. It's okay. But the point being that, and this is a true story, that was one of the reasons why I returned to Washington. As you remember, in the 1980s, people thought, even then, Washington was a bit of a cesspool. I worked for a senator of great distinction, of great integrity, of great intelligence, and I thought, you know what, if people like this are in the Senate, I want more of this. And I came back and I started at the State Department, I worked at the White House with President Clinton, various other things like that. So the point is, there are good people in Washington. Now they all seem to be back here at Georgia Tech, but send some more to DC, we'll be very happy to do that. It's also a pleasure to be with my fellow panelists, both of whom are personal friends. I think they're both terrific. They actually have expertise on the topic, and so I'll try to come in behind them and add some value. But look, TPS is a political question, highly politicized. It had bipartisan support until about 3 weeks ago. And the reason why was because, as Charles was saying, there are some 8 million Venezuelans who have left Venezuela. Now, this well predates U.S. sanctions, anything like this. This started in 2013, 2014 with the collapse of the oil prices and the gross mismanagement of the energy sector of the first Chavez, then Maduro regime, the lack of investment that was going in. And as you know, energy is a highly capital-intensive sector, and so if you don't invest continuously, your production, by definition, is going to decrease. And the massive, and I'm talking billions, hundreds of billions of dollars that was simply stolen by the regime. And not invested, not for the people, not for the food, not for the jobs, not for the education that everybody says, oh, it's, this is what it's going for. No, this is a regime that has stolen the patrimony of the nation. And it's been going on for literally 25 years, since 1999, but it's increased dramatically since Nicolas Maduro first came into office in 2013. So that's the time frame, that's my frame of reference. And the point is that the desperation of the Venezuelan citizens has increased in that time. And you've seen the numbers, the flows of people first started as a bit of a trickle. It started with the professional classes, those that were losing their jobs in PDVSA, the national energy sector, because they were being persecuted politically. Their jobs were being eliminated. The PDVSA, which had been a world-class energy company, was being turned into a political piggy bank for the regime. The managerial class ended up in Calgary, Canada, ended up in Colombia, ended up in Houston, ended up in other places, enriching those societies. But after the managerial class and the professional class, then we started to see migration of other folks from all classes in Venezuela, folks who are literally just desperate to leave. And that's what you have in some ways, folks who have not just gone to Brazil or Colombia or Ecuador, and I totally agree with that, and that's having political implications in those countries as well. and they're not happy I mean, these are really difficult issues. But many folks have, of course, come to the United States, and they were granted TPS, or temporary protected status, for the reason that returning folks to their home country under that scenario was seen to be inhumane because the conditions were so terrible. I personally have not been to Venezuela in the last several months, but my understanding is things have not dramatically improved since TPS was first granted. So I think the question is not to me, it's to the White House. What is the rationale here? But I think you also have to recognize, we can like it or not, we can agree with it or not, but the point is that this administration was elected to address immigration in the United States. It's a mandate that they ran on, it's a mandate that they claim, and they are doing something about it. And so this falls into that category, I believe, in the context not of Venezuela, not of TPS, but in the context of the broader migration discussion that the United States is having. And I think it's having dramatic implications in how Washington right now is viewing Venezuela. I mean, is Venezuela a foreign policy issue? Is Venezuela an energy issue? Is Venezuela a migration issue or something else? I would argue it's all of the above. And the question then, in the Washington context, as every good bureaucrat like I used to be knows, is who's up, who's down, who's got the president's ear, and who's able to advance their particular policy priorities in that context. And I honestly think that's where we are. But having said that, these are issues that profoundly impact people. Individuals, families, and we're here to celebrate somebody who has literally sacrificed her family, or for her family, for her country, her freedom, various other things. So I don't think we can lose sight of the fact, I mean, this isn't a policy issue. This is a personal issue, it's a family issue, it affects people, and it's, I suppose, somewhat ironic that a community of folks who really voted for a certain candidate are now finding themselves impacted in a negative way by the policies of that administration.
I was just given the rap signal, and we could speak here volumes, but I wanted to, if I may, ask you one final question, the same question for all three of you, and if you will, give me a 30-second answer, starting with you, Eric. Is there hope for democracy in Venezuela? Is there hope for people like María Corina Machado, who we're honoring today?
Yeah, I think there is hope. If you lose hope, you don't have anything. I think that's the one thing that remains in Venezuela right now, and it's manifested in the person of María Corina Machado. Literally. I mean, she is what, if I can say, she is the individual who is offering hope to the people. Mundo Gonzalez is the president-elect, but the person who is offering hope to the people is María Corina Machado. That's why I, in fact, have started a campaign that she has been nominated, but that she should be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Because literally, she is the person that is driving that hope for change in the country. The next question is, how do you manifest that? That's for the next panel, but I would say yes.
Yeah. Jenny?
I will say yes, too, because there is a vibrant civil society that is still alive in Venezuela. Their hope, though, that is up against a huge challenge of an authoritarian government.
Thank you. Mr. Ambassador?
María Corina Machado embodies that. She personifies the hope. That was the basis of her campaign. She's keeping it alive.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's extraordinary. And I'm going to say this. She ran a campaign that no male ever could have done. Never would have thought of, where she says, I want to bring home the Venezuelan family to Venezuela. Yeah. No guy, and I'm saying this as a guy, ever would have thought of that, right? And she did, and she's there.
That's a great point.
Now she's not, in London, in Washington, she's there, and she personifies that hope. So yes. Yeah. But the democratic institutions exist on paper in Venezuela. They don't exist in reality. They are all controlled by the executive. And I'm going to go on longer, I apologize. There's a lesson for all of us. You've got to tend that garden constantly. We've got to worry about democratic institutions in our country. It's not just something that you set up and you walk away from. And that's the lesson from Venezuela, and that's the lesson from María Corina Machado.
Eric Farnsworth, Jennie Lincoln, Ambassador Shapiro, Thank you very much.